Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is April the 18th, the 108th day of the year. 257 days or years over with. It's National Animal Cracker Day. International Amateur Radio Day. Talking about ham radio, don't you know? National Exercise Day. World Marbles Day. National Piñata Day. International Jugglers Day. Adult Autism Awareness Day. National Columnist Day. National Lineman Appreciation Day. National Velociraptor Awareness Day. Pet Owners Independence Day. National Clean Out Your Medicine Cabinet Day. World Heritage Day. It's also Good Friday. Easter is coming Sunday, don't you know? Orthodox, it's Good Friday. It's Feet Week. Discover National Park Fortnight. And Orthodox Holy Week. Now let's see what we got in the news worth talking about. The Democratic Senator Van Hollen went to rescue the Maryland father being held in El Salvador prison. Actually, eventually got to meet him. That's Abrego Garcia, who is not only an abuser, but member of MS-13 as well. El Salvador says he's going to remain in custody. Van Hollen said he went with his main goal to meet with him, make sure he was okay. Now, the victims of migrant violence don't get such consideration. But they're pulling on all the stops to try to do something for this man. A radical activist who has fueled Cori Bush's campaigns has come out as a spokesperson for the track star's murder suspect. The Dominique Alexander has repeatedly called for defunding the police. Yes, we should all live in harmony and giving her and her folks anything they want. She is the spokesperson for the family of the 17-year-old boy accused of stabbing Frisco, Texas track star Austin Metcalf to death. She has a long history supporting anti-police activity. She's also has close ties to former squad member Cori Bush. Minister Dominique Alexander, Dallas-based defund the police activist and social justice leader. They got a great name for it. In the headlines is he and his organization have done everything they can for the accused murderer. The Next Generation Action Network been rallying in defense of the family of 17-year-old Carmelo Anthony. He's accused, and in fact, I am told it's caught on video camera, fatally stabbing Metcalf and Anthony himself. Now, let's see. More details have come out about the Florida State University shooting suspect named Phoenix Eichner. No motive is known as of yet. 20 years old, left 2 dead and 6 wounded, using a handgun, or a weapon, which I should say, that belonged to his deputy sheriff mother. He was shot and wounded by responding officers. refused to comply with commands when they said put the gun down. Mother's a deputy sheriff at Leon County Sheriff's Office, and they believe he shot the victims with his mother's former service handgun, which she kept for personal use after the force upgraded to new weapons. A lot of these people that go on these shooting rampages, you never know why they're doing it. A California girl was speaking to a school board, recounting trans athlete experiences. School board president said, "Wrap it up." She was crying while reliving the activities that had taken place. It was, of course, as you might guess, California school board. Featured emotional debate over transgender athletes being allowed to share locker rooms with high school girls. During the Lucia Mara Unified School District Board meeting on Wednesday, high school junior girls track athlete for Arroyo Grande High School named Celeste Deist took the podium to recount her experience of having to change in front of a biological male trans athlete while the athlete allegedly watched her undress. But of course, the school board didn't want to hear it. Well, Gene Hackman and his wife, while living in a $4 million home that was rodent infested. And that's very visible through police photos. She died of hantavirus, and he apparently expired from lack of care. Well, TSA wants to make everybody aware that the deadline is coming up to have the real ID, the one with the gold star on it. President Trump is talking about his contingency plans if China fails to make a deal. Well, there's still questions about the reality of the space flight of Bezos's rocket. Wendy's, the fast food chain, has made disparaging comments about Katy Perry's space voyage. It's one of the strangest brand versus celebrity moments of the year. Wendy's lobbed a spicy shot at pop star Katy Perry after she completed her Blue Origin suborbital space flight. When asked to apologize, they said, no, I don't think so. Well, illegal alien facing deportation begged the Supreme Court to let him stay. But Justice Kagan denied emergency appeal to halt deportation of Mexican nationals who were claiming asylum from the cartels. If they weren't robbing and killing, it might be different, but now let's see what else we got. A federal judge appointed by Obama temporarily restricts Doge's access to personalized Social Security data. The Democrats and their minions are determined to allow the current state of graft and theft to continue. This federal judge in Baltimore issued a preliminary injunction yesterday restricting the Department of Government Efficiency's access to Social Security data. U.S. District Judge Ellen Hollander, an Obama appointee, says Doge-affiliated staffers must get rid of any non-anonymized Social Security data they've received since January 20th. And they're barred from making any changes to the computer code or software used by Social Security. Obama, even now, has a impact on this country. President Biden proclaimed Trans Day of Visibility in 2024 that coincided with Easter Sunday. I don't know what the Democrats' fascination with trans is, or LGBTQ plus, minus, exclamation point, whatever, but it seems to be a major hot button with them. With smartphone use could reduce dementia risk in older adults, according to a new study. Digital technology use is linked to 58% lower risk of cognitive impairment. The first generation has been exposed consistently to digital technology has reached the age where symptoms of dementia tend to emerge. Unless you're in Congress, in which case it's far earlier than that. Democrats are now relying on what's being referred to as the new lie to sway public opinion. ICE is looking for a new weapon for their arsenal. They seek sensitive data on the crackdown on illegal immigration and waste. They want access to beneficiary information for illegal immigration, which of course has the liberal left losing its tiny little mind. Well, a New England serial killer is still being discussed. Human remains were found in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. He's known as the CT River Valley killer. And a survivor was stabbed 27 times, but survived anyway, warned locals to remain vigilant. ICE has arrested over 200 illegal aliens in New York City's most crime-infested neighborhoods. ICE said many of the arrests came after authorities refused to honor ICE immigration detainers and release the illegals back into the community. They turned the jails in New York City into revolving doors. They may pick you up, but they're going to put you right back. Well, many Democrats trying to amend their state constitution to allow trans athletes in girls' sports. No one has yet explained to me the rationale. Well, S&P 500 has lost nearly 10% in 2025. The 60-40 portfolio stocks to bonds has long been the tried and true method for those who build their retirement nest eggs with a safety net of diversification. But according to BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, that formula is no longer working. Well, a Venezuelan migrant's been arrested in a sanctuary city, Chicago specifically, for the 6th time in 13 months, days after prosecutors dropped charges. He robbed a woman at gunpoint. But in Chicago, that's okay. As long as he's an undocumented immigrant, he can do what he wants. He's got free reign. Well, President Trump's ready to walk away from the Ukraine-Russia peace deal. They're coming to any kind of agreement. Well, a lot of the angel moms, the mothers of those individuals murdered by undocumented immigrants, are raising their heads and finally speaking out when the Democrats are doing their best to hush it all up and push it under the rug. The California's most popular music festival comes with what's referred to as a side of diabolical sticker shock. Coachella. Camping can cost up to $10,000. Lemonade is $17, and its most expensive hamburger is $150 to sit in the desert and listen to music. General admission is $599. If you want a VIP ticket, that's $1,199. Camping starts at $150 and goes up to $10,000. Meals anywhere from $20 to $30. Beer is $15, and a soda is $7. That is ridiculous. It's considered an A-list attraction. Well, Liv Tyler was shocked to find out Aerosmith frontman Steven Tyler was her biological father. She found out at his concert. He's actually the father of Liv, Mia, Chelsea, and Taj. At the time, she believed her father was musician Todd Rundgren, but Tyler had begun to come around and see her when she was about 8. Her mother, Bebe Buell, eventually took her to the Aerosmith concert. And that's when she put all the pieces together. Health and Human Services is probing a hospital that fired a nurse who blew the whistle on minors getting gender treatments. Now, that's something to be protected. Apparently, the Democrats feel you have a constitutional right to change your sex. Well, an E. coli outbreak went unpublicized by the FDA despite it affecting 15 states. 36 people are hospitalized, one person died. But the FDA didn't publicize it, even though they had a report into the E. coli outbreak. And that report said it infected 89 people, not 36. The outbreak was linked to romaine lettuce. First case is reported in St. Louis County in Missouri in November 2024. They got an air taxi service that's going to become a reality. Archer Aviation teamed up with United Airlines to make air taxis a reality. They're going to launch commercial operations in Abu Dhabi this year. A growing number of companies are working to replace traditional airport communities with, or commutes with, they're going to replace the cabs and trains with a flying service. Well, Matthew Lawrence, former child star, spent the last decade acting out of fear. He competed in The Masked Singer. He explained he spent the last 10 years avoiding any roles that required him to sing in front of a crowd. Says he has stage fright. Well, financial markets are screaming about Trump's tariffs. The people spending their own money anticipated the economic damage from these tariffs wouldn't be temporary, but be permanent. The well, the jury's still out, though. We'll see how that goes. Supreme Court's going to make a major decision that could set limits on the power of district judges. I've made the comment before, you got a judge in Podunk, Alabama, making decisions that affect the entire country. That's kind of ludicrous, especially in some of the recent cases when the judges in question have a history of being Democratic activists. Well, Harvard told President Trump to kiss off, so he said, okay, fine, no federal money for you. And these are universities that have billions of dollars in endowments. Well, David Hogg is continuing to spread his lunacy. He is the DNC vice chair and said Hogg's $20 million idea, the most insane thing he's heard. We need to send Hogg back to wherever it was he came from. Well, the Attorney General of New York, who has carried out a long-running vendetta against President Trump's got her own problems now. Mortgage fraud. The same thing she accused him of doing. She claimed 2 houses in Virginia were her home of record. Didn't live in either one of them. She also claimed her father was her husband. Go figure. All right, I think that has wrapped up our news segment. Well, in this episode, we're going to talk about a topic I've always found fascinating: Men in Black. I'm not talking about the movie with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. I'm talking about the actual figures that show up on your doorstep. I've read a lot about the situation. The one area that a lot of reports have come from is Cannock Chase in England. And if you look at all the reports that have come out of there about various ethereal and surreal issues, it's been the domain of UFOs and ghosts and werewolves and Bigfoot type creatures and large black glowing-eyed cats. But in spite of all that, there are people who still live there. Lived there for decades. And a number of them have reported, because there have been a lot of UFO sightings in the Cannock Chase area. And they talk about Men in Black showing up on a doorstep and ordering them not to talk about it. And there's been reports literally from all the world. So what are Men in Black? Now, according to the 1997 movie and its 2002 sequel, Men in Black are secret agents of a covert arm of the U.S. government. And their role is to hide the fact that there's a massive alien presence on Earth. Now, quite frankly, some Men in Black are actually secret agents of various government departments. But the majority of the so-called Men in Black seem to be of a different persuasion, if you will. According to some eyewitness testimony and numerous case studies, the real MIB may well be alien entities themselves, working to ensure we never successfully uncover the truth about their presence or what it is they're doing. On the other hand, some students of the lore and legend of the Men in Black suggest these creatures are utterly occult-based, supernatural beings that originate in and inhabit and surface from strange and enigmatic netherworlds very different from our own. A number of individuals actually think the MIBs are nothing less than demons, little minions of Satan himself. Meanwhile, an investigator of the UFO phenomenon suggests that Men in Black may be time travelers from humankind's far-flung future. Whatever their point of origin might be, one thing we can say with confidence and certainty, they're among us, and there's absolutely nothing positive or welcoming about them. Now, if your personal preference is studying UFOs and all its attendant puzzles, then those mysterious black-garbed men may come to see you one day. Now, I spoke there for 10 years at Roswell, and I talked about every topic you can imagine until I became politically unacceptable to the individual who gained control of the board. He wanted his books to be the only thing sold in the bookstore because, of course, he was smarter than the rest of us. Now, in looking into the history of Men in Black, there have been stories about what appear to be Men in Black going back many, many decades. But it really started to gather steam in 1947. Now, 47 was the year that the Roswell crash took place, as well as a number of other crashes. And if you think Roswell was the only crash, you haven't read my book, Beyond Roswell, which you can get on Amazon. Now, Men in Black started to gain attention in regard to Albert Bender. Now, if UFOs itself, or themselves, actually started to come to the forefront in June of 47 when Kenneth Arnold, a pilot, was searching for an aircraft that said to have crashed on the southwest side of Mount Rainier. That's a 14,000 plus foot peak situated on Washington State's Cascade Mountain Range. Well, he didn't find the crashed plane, but he did find something else. A bunch of silver disc that looked like saucer-like objects. There was a chain of them about 5 miles long, he said. There were, I think he said 9. Now, a lot of that information, if you want to research it yourself, file a FOIA request with the FBI because they took a report. But this was the first ever widely reported account of UFO sighting in the U.S. And Arnold couldn't get any explanations for what he saw. And as the U.S. became I guess you could say a magnet for strange aerial objects, UFOs were, where they were from, why they were here. And it wasn't just military. Summer of 47 succeeded in firing up the minds and imaginations of everyday folks across the U.S. A lot of folks would ultimately embark on a lifelong quest to find the truth behind the flying saucers. And not all of them were happy with what they found, though. That brings us to Albert Bender. Bender, in fact, almost single-handedly ushered in what you might refer to as the plague of the Men in Black, just as Kenneth Arnold became the poster child for UFOs. Well, for Bender, it all began with intrigue. But his story ultimately became dominated by horror and paranoia and left behind a trio of cold-hearted, dark-dressed figures that have systematically mentally tortured whole sections of the population ever since. Now, Bender was a resident of Bridgeport, Connecticut. I can't talk. He had a fascination with strange and unearthly phenomena that actually predated Kenneth Arnold by about a year and a half and ultimately spiraled down into a full-blown obsession. Now, a phenomena that started Bender on his paranormal search occurred in December of 1945 when a squadron of Avenger-class aircraft, PBMs, vanished under circumstances that are still have never been explained. They took off from Naval Air Station at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was a simple training mission. This was Flight 19, which has gained a great deal of fame in the bizarre segment of society. And then, as part of the search for him, a Martin Mariner flying boat went out, and it disappeared. Now, this whole episode has gained near legendary status, now an integral part of the lore of the Bermuda Triangle. Now, those who poo-poo the very idea say, well, the pilots of Flight 19 got lost, became disoriented, ran out of fuel, and ditched in the Atlantic. There are those that say that a time portal opened up, and they flew away. Well, whatever the truth of the matter might be, the story caught the attention of 23-year-old Albert Bender. And using this case as a starting point, he began to dig deeply into the collective works of none other than Charles Fort, one of the best-known chroniclers of things weird and paranormal. The magazine, 40 Times, got its name from Charles Fort. Well, by the time of Kenneth Arnold's sighting in the summer of 47, Bender was living in modified sections on the top floor of an old 3-story house with his stepfather. As his fascination with flying saucers began to grow, he spent more and more time locked into the upper room, offshoot of the attic, where he carefully studied paranormal books and journals and newspaper clippings, and even used a telescope to study the sky at night. Well, UFOs weren't the only things that had gotten their hooks into Bender's mind. He was also fascinated by the gothic horrors of Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, a number of other horror writers. Had a fascination with the occult, studied seances and black magic, the Ouija boards. Unsurprisingly, living a solitary existence in a dark attic, his character and life began to change, bit by bit and piece by piece, and not really in a positive fashion. One day out of the blue, he took it upon himself to paint the walls of the attic with the faces of grotesque, nightmarish creatures. And it kept him busy for almost a year. He began to refer to it as Bender's Chamber of Horrors. For a while at least, he amused on the idea of turning the entire upper floor into something resembling a haunted house that he planned to use to make money. charge thrill seekers to come explore. That didn't get off the ground. And the social level was beginning to develop a bit of reputation. Somebody was just a sandwich short of a picnic. And by his own admission, there were people in the town that heard about what he was doing and frankly thought he was crazy. He also had psychological issues. He displayed clear symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. Had a specific set place for everything in his attic and immediately tell if anything was moved even slightly outside of its strict, rigid confines. He had become highly irritated. He was accused by his friends of being overly fussy as a result of his need to have total control over everything within his environment. And he was probably hypochondriac, according to he had a bunch of medical problems. And while still a young man, his UFO interest began to develop. Should be noted that high strangeness had significantly afflicted the Bender family for a number of years prior to his own experience. A cousin of his had undergone a nightmarish bedroom visitation from a woman in black. A curious precursor to the nightmare in which Bender eventually found himself. Another relative in northern Pennsylvania died of a brain hemorrhage that certain members of the family came to believe was due to the actions of a supernatural entity that haunted the corners of a nearby cemetery. In other words, the Bender clan had a lot of interaction with ghosts and specters and beasts and the paranormal. Well, it was December 1950 when flying saucers took center stage for Bender. He began to more seriously collect and cross-reference the reports and stories that he came across. And he hooked up with like-minded devotees of the space people and embarked upon the first tentative steps of an ambitious project. He was going to establish a worldwide network of UFO investigators to be called the International Flying Saucer Bureau. It actually began operation in April 1952, and Bender began to publish his own magazine called Space Review. Well, incredibly, dwelling in the heart of a dark and shadowly occult-dominated attic in the home of his stepfather, he actually achieved something that went far beyond his wildest dreams. The International Flying Saucer Bureau not only began to blossom, caught the attention of flying saucer disciples across the planet. UFO reports poured in, people eagerly clamored to become members of the group, and Bender spent night after night faithfully answering letters of a cosmic sort that reached him by the sackload. So for Albert Bender, everything was going well. A solid network of flying saucer devotees had been created. There were International Flying Saucer Bureau representatives in a number of countries, including Britain and Australia. And in no time at all, his little group had become a fairly significant force in the UFO research scene. Well, in a classic live fast and die young scenario, the International Flying Saucer Bureau wasn't destined to last long. It was a stark fear rather than a pompous, ego-driven bureaucracy that, like so many UFO research groups, have brought this organization to a grinding halt. Began on the night of July 30th, 1952. Only a few months after it was established, Bender got an anonymous phone call. With the stepfather not around, he was the one that answered the phone. And when he picked up the phone, nobody said a word. But he was instinctively certain somebody was at the other end of the line listening intently. And suddenly his head began to spin and throb, and he finally had to hang up and go to bed. A few days later, He was at his local movie theater. A new sci-fi flick was due to be screened, and he was eagerly awaiting its appearance. Well, the movie wasn't what it was cracked up to be, but for the walk home shortly after, before the arrival of 12 o'clock was almost definitely not uneventful. As he negotiated the dark sidewalks, and increasingly concerned Bender was sure that somebody was pursuing him. Made it home without incident, though, and as his stepfather was already asleep, he made his quiet, careful way to the attic. As he got close to the door, he couldn't fail to see an eerie glow come underneath the thin gap directly beneath the door frame. Flung open the door and was confronted by the strong smell of burning sulfur, and saw a bright, shimmering object hovering in the room. Suddenly his eyes felt irritated, at which point he turned on the light and the strange object vanished. With his OCD kicking in big time, he could see that certain files weren't quite where they should be. Clearly, somebody or something had been rifling through his flying saucer material. Well, he tried violently to put his unsettling experience behind him and focus on other matters, such as the day-to-day activities of his organization. Methodically affixing large plastic spiders to the ceiling of the attic in which to terrify visiting friends. What was clearly a normal action for Bender. And he went to hang out at the local cinema. But this would prove again to be a costly action. One night in November 1952, he was happily watching the latest sci-fi release when he was overwhelmed by a strange, unsettling feeling. It was a mixture of dread and trepidation and a sense of being intently stared at from the recesses of the movie house. And suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he was horrified to see a human-like form materialize in a nearby seat. A well-dressed man in dark clothes had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Shadowy figure could hardly be considered a local. For one thing, his eyes glowed like flashlight bulbs. He was once again afflicted with sudden dizziness. His head swirled, and he was forced to close his eyes as he sought to lessen the nausea that threatened to engulf him. When he opened them, the relieved Bender could see this spectral being had vanished. So he tried to focus his attention on the movie again, but that didn't work. Minutes later, had another distinct, uneasy feeling of being watched by unknown forces. So he slowly turned around, and yet again he saw the glowing eyes of a well-dressed fiend of the night staring coldly at him. So, as you might guess, he wasted no time getting back to the safety of his attic. Throughout the next few months, his dizzy spells continued. Brief manifestations of dark-suited entities plagued his days and nights. Alarming outbreaks of poltergeist activity occurred in the attic. He kept smelling brimstone-like odors that sometimes lasted for days. Began to develop intense migraine-like headaches. The height of his torment, midway through 1953, the three men dressed in dark clothes treated Bender to the worst of all his visitations. According to the story that quickly did the rounds of flying saucer research circles, the trio of mysterious characters revealed to a panic-stricken Bender the truth behind the presence in our world. But they told him in stern tones, never revealed what he had been told under any circumstances. Unless he had some sadistic wish to incur an immediate and deadly wrath, which he most certainly did not. In fact, so terrified was Bender by the whole experience, in October 1953, he announced to his shocked followers in the pages of his Space Review magazine he was closing the doors of the International Flying Saucer Bureau and leaving the flying saucer arena permanently. Well, his own words on that matter, published in the final issue of the magazine, only added to the controversy. He said, "We'd like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we're sorry we've been advised in a negative. Advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious." And as for Bender, that was that. The legend of the Men in Black and their threats was duly born, and they successfully claimed their first victim. He was eventually found dead. The question has long been, was it murder or suicide? Well, the from Albert Bender, let's turn to a band by the name of Gray Barker. Early 53, Gray Barker teamed up with Bender. He was a resident of Clarksburg, West Virginia. Ran a motion picture booking business at the time, handled both indoor and outdoor theaters out his home state. And he was highly skilled and truly atmospheric writer in all manner of flying saucer-related activities and tales. And he was also someone who never allowed the facts to get in the way of a good story. Entertainment purposes alone, this was fine, but it's unfortunate when it comes to unraveling the Bender affair. Jim Mosley, who was a close friend of Barker's, died in 1984, explained why Barker may have been so captivated by Albert Bender and the International Flying Saucer Bureau. He said Barker's background was quite a bit like Bender's. As a child and an adolescent, he was drawn to horror movies, horror masks, and things like that, just like Bender. And that may have been something to do with Gray wanting to get involved in the Bureau. And Barker did far more than just get involved with Bender. In 1956, Barker wrote and published a captivating title called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. It devoted a considerable amount of space to the Bender controversy. And this book has now achieved nearly cult-like status. And in it, Barker avoided explicitly stating that Bender's MIB were agents of the U.S. government, possibly from the FBI. That was certainly an implication he made for his eager readers, though, and it's not by any means an impossible scenario. UFO authority Jerome Clark says it is likely the FBI agent did visit Bender. In those dark Cold War days, Clark suggests nearly anybody that harbored nonconformist ideas had national security implications found themselves under J. Edgar Hoover's Bureau's gaze. One doesn't have to speculate too hard to conclude that an active head of an early UFO organization would warrant a visit and interview. He said, in his opinion, agents may well have visited and they may have said something he took as threatening. And from that point, Bender's own imagination and Barker's freewheeling exploitation together generated what became known as the Bender mystery. Well, Clark's opinion's a valid one. It's that very same year that Bender was visited by the three strange men. CIA brought together a group called the Robertson Panel that focused much of its time and attention on the national security implications of the UFO issue. One of the more notable recommendations of the panel was that a number of the new public UFO investigative groups in the U.S. at that time, such as the Civilian Saucer Investigation and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, can be clandestinely watched very carefully due to the apparent irresponsibility and possible use of these groups for subversive purposes. In those days, if somebody wasn't your close friend, they were clearly a communist. Clearly, Bender's International Flying Saucer Bureau has quickly became a fairly significant player in the UFO scene, would also been ripe for careful scrutiny by certain individuals and certain elements of the U.S. intelligence community. Alan Greenfield, a ceremonial magician and Gnostic bishop, strongly agrees. He offered his views on the issue by beginning back in 1975. I had a meeting with Dewey Fournette. He was involved at the time in the July 1952 UFO flap over Washington, D.C. and the White House. Fournette had served in the Technical Capabilities Branch of the U.S. Air Force Intelligence until his transfer in 1952 to the current Intelligence Branch and became the liaison officer between the Pentagon and the Air Force UFO investigation Project Blue Book. The UFO flap to which Greenfield referred began late on the night of July 19, 1952, and included sightings of UFOs by the military and pilots of civilian aircraft and members of the public. This wave of incidents led the FBI, after getting a briefing on the matter from Commander Randall Boyd of the Air Force Current Intelligence Branch, Note it's not entirely impossible the objects sighted may possibly be ships from another planet such as Mars. That's in a 1952 FBI report. Subtext that was considered far more important to the Pentagon than this sensational series of UFO sightings over D.C., according to Greenfield, was that had there been a Soviet attack on the night of the major wave of flying saucer encounters? The first strike on the U.S., in other words, then it probably would have been disastrously successful. According to what for NATO Greenfield, because the entirety of the military apparatus was so preoccupied looking for flying saucers with radar and scrambled jets, was the sheer amount of UFO-dominated radio traffic. No meaningful attention could be given to far more conventional sources of perceived dangers, such as the communist. Well, Greenfield had his own personal viewpoint on this matter, which wasn't really in accord with those of Fournier and the Air Force. He said, I'm not endorsing it. I think the idea of a Soviet first attack was much more mythic than the UFOs themselves, but if you put yourself in the position of U.S. policymakers in 1952, this was a perfectly plausible scenario. And then when the Robinson panel was conceived, their conclusion was that the private UFO organization was coming into existence at the time, just like Bender's, could be infiltrated by communist agents used to set off a false UFO flap, wanted to preoccupy the entirety of military establishment at a vulnerable moment. In other words, if they did this, a sneak Soviet attack could be successfully launched. There was a suggestion made that might be the interest in national security for these private organizations to be watched closely, or maybe even closed down. Not in an overt sense, as that may have created some civil liberty issues, but send somebody to the door to talk to the leading person in the organization or to any pertinent witnesses and scare the bejesus out of them. And that might well have been what happened to Bender. Well, the theory of UFO groups as a national security threat was given a further boost when on August 28, 1953, Gary Barker himself got an ominous knock at his front door in West Virginia. It was a special agent of the FBI who had a whole list of questions concerning Bender's International Flying Saucer Bureau. Turns out that Bender had some weeks earlier forwarded to Barker a number of business cards that Bender had printed. The identifying Barker as chief investigator of the IFSB. Scared out of his wits, Barker shakily admitted that the FBI agent had given 4 or 5 of those cards to close friends who still had them when he checked in on them. So something of a surprise, the FBI turned up on Barker's doorstep with one of those business cards. Now, before you think Hoover's men are the greatest thing since sliced bread, they were effective when they went to do what they were hired to do. But unfortunately, his descendants today are a little bit short of the Keystone Cops. I've dealt with several who couldn't have found their rear ends with both hands, a map, and a flashlight. And they wanted to be taken seriously. Well, in the case of Barker, the G-Man wanted to know all about the IFSB and Barker's role in it. Barker replied the International Flying Saucer Bureau was simply an innocent organization formed to investigate flying saucer phenomena, and the business cards were a mean by which investigators of the group could be identified. Now, the FBI agent then went on to ask Barker if he knew a certain individual who lived in Florida. Barker replied he didn't. Prompted the agent to advise Barker the man had suffered an epileptic fit, been taken to nearby St. Mary's Hospital. In his belongings was an International Flying Saucer Bureau card. Satisfied that Barker didn't know who the man was, the FBI agent simply thanked him for his time and left, giving Barker the opportunity to calm his shattered nerves. Well, after the FBI agent departed, Barker began to wonder if there really had been an epileptic man after all, or if this had been a ruse to allow the FBI to covertly check out Barker, Bender, and International Flying Saucer Bureau. Barker voiced all these concerns and several more in a hastily written missive to Bender. While Barker wasn't lying about having been visited by an official of the FBI, scenario to give Barker's predilection for modified tales and pranks can't be entirely ruled out. This incident may have added a lot of weight to Barker's assertion that Bender's three men were indeed attached to the secret world of government officialdom. On a similar path, Dominic Lucchese and August Roberts, two members of the IFSB who subsequently became close friends of Bender, stated that Bender's visitors were possibly from the government. And Jim Mosley said Bender's original story, and I met him, was that the shut-up came from the government. It was never actually said, but maybe it was the FBI. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. Next week, we'll talk more about some government minions and the International Flying Saucer Bureau and more about the Men in Black. But until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great weekend.